many people here believe in the firewall as in like a strict separation of church and state? How many people think that's like a core of value of what they do? I think the interesting thing that this conference makes me think about is that like I also feel like a little bit like, I don't know, sketched out whenever, like I won't even read an underwriting message when somebody asks me to, because I just feel like, I don't know, can I cross that line? But this whole discussion, I think, is really great. And it reminds me of something that a public radio lifer once said, Ira Glass, when he was talking about going from like this upstart show to selling it to a bunch of stations, which is that the more idealistic you want to be, the more cunning you have to be on the business side. And so we're going to talk to some people who are doing some cunning stuff, trying to cross the firewall without breaking it, and find out a little bit more about the do's and don'ts from their experiences.
Well, so at Vermont Public Radio, first and foremost, my team and I believe very strongly in protecting the firewall, because we understand that editorial integrity and the trust of our audience is our bread and butter. So I think the suspicion that we are in any way sort of trying to figure out a way around that isn't the case. And I think that at VPR, as at many stations for many years, the reporters and development people would try not to make eye contact in the hallway, And I think that what we've figured out, thanks to some new energy in our newsroom with new leadership, and with our existing content folks, is that there is a way to coordinate our efforts without breaching the firewall in a way that would sort of diminish the reason that people believe in Vermont Public Radio and trust our content. And so that's really what our project was all about through the BizLab, was to figure out ways that we could work with Howard Weiss-Tisman, our Southern Vermont reporter, to not influence his work, but to help give it greater visibility and to give him greater visibility and opportunities for engagement in his community.
Maida?
I think that WDET is a little bit of an interesting station because we are inherently collaborative in a lot of what we do. So although that editorial firewall definitely exists, there's an emphasis across all teams to work together in order to figure out what's best for the station more holistically. So we don't have marketing and underwriting and membership telling our editorial team what to do, but we do have our editorial team keeping those teams in the loop about what they're doing, so then those teams can then go out and kind of work that into their messaging. So I think that makes us unique, and it makes it a great place to work because we can all work together in that capacity without tainting the firewall.
And Giselle, you have any thoughts on that?
I think for WLRN, because we are actually two separate organizations, that firewall was pretty thick for quite some time. And I think this was the very first project where we actually were able to work very collaboratively. We actually, surprisingly, we didn't find as many challenges as we thought we would, but I think that's because we sat down at the table prior to starting our experiment, and we're very clear about what we wanted to accomplish and how, and I think the rules were kind of set from the very beginning, and so I think that was very helpful.
Actually, that was going to be going to my second question. It sounds like you did some things right in order to facilitate this collaboration, but I'm actually going to throw it to your counterparts at the station. And actually, my question to you is, in working across the firewall, through the firewall, over it, whatever your metaphor is, like, what do you think, what would you recommend to other folks here that you do? What worked?
The first thought I've had is, I feel like we're using the word firewall in a wrong way. The firewall is, we have someone giving money to the station. I hear there's a story about it and someone's saying, don't write that. That is the firewall. I don't think it's a firewall. What really worked with us is that the first thing that marketing said to me is that you don't have to change anything what you're doing. All they're doing is trying to get my stories out, sell my stories. So I feel like we're using this word firewall and it's already freaking everyone out. And I don't think there is a firewall there between that.
So Howard, you're saying that the thing that made you feel comfortable was that don't change anything you're doing, essentially.
Right. I mean, there is a firewall. The firewall is, don't write a story about someone who gives money to the station. And that is very important, and that never has been breached and shouldn't be breached. But I don't feel like what we're talking about here even approaches that firewall.
I think what was interesting in our case is that there had already been something in place that was similar to the project that WLRN launched with BizLab. So for us, it was an expansion of this. So the editorially, we already had rules and set in place. So when we wanted to expand, it was, as Giselle was saying, what we needed to do and what happened was everything was laid out on the table. There was that conversation, and as was mentioned before, really protecting the editorial integrity of our station was key.
I guess the follow-up that I am thinking on the flip side is what are some things that you ran into in the course of your project that you decided let's not do that again? So essentially, when it comes to collaborating with editorial or with marketing, what are some things folks should avoid in your experience?
I mean, I think one of the things that we focused on a lot in our initial conversations with Howard was to understand what his boundaries were, because a lot of what the research...
heart-to-heart?
Yeah, so tell me. But really, I think what we were trying to understand is, based on the research, we knew that Facebook was a platform where our audience was. And Howard, at the time, was not very active on Facebook from a personal perspective. So one of the first things we did is we spent a half hour on the phone kind of cleaning up his personal profile, because he was willing to sort of use that as a tool to do outreach. And so, but one of the things that we quickly realized and decided was we didn't necessarily want to put Howard in the position of having to receive unsolicited comments or questions or even attacks via social media. So we sort of had to navigate sort of how much do we go all in on using Facebook as a way to connect directly with the audience. So I think understanding, your reporter's or your content person's comfort level with different tactics that you wanted to explore is really important to know going in.
I think something I would avoid if we were to work on something similar to this again is making any assumptions that anybody knows what you're talking about, which is less about kind of the separation between editorial and the business side, and more just establishing a baseline education for where people might have kind of gaps in understanding of what you're working on. So my boss is the news director and often jokes about putting Twitter on his typewriter. And so that was the baseline that I was working on. And I really had to check myself as we were going through kind of this development process to make sure that everybody was aligned when it came to understanding the product, understanding what it meant, how it would impact our own social media feeds and our own editorial deployment. So just kind of ensuring that everybody was on the same page from the very beginning, and we were all using the same words to describe the same things, and kind of knew where we all stood was very important by the end of it.
I have to say, for this particular process, it went as smooth as we could possibly ask for. But again, I think it was because we set all our cards out on the table from day one. We were very, very clear about everything, and we communicated constantly. I mean, even though the editorial team actually lent us one of their own, Katie, for this particular project, and they actually said, on this day, she will work on your project on content only. We still communicated every single day, or any single time a decision was going to be made in regards to the product. We spoke about every single detail. So I think communication is key, and the earlier that you begin that communication and the clearer you are, the better.
I think when we were going through the whole project and our initial BizLab meeting and kind of coming here and developing what that would look like, we had this very firm idea about what we thought was great, and of course, editorial will be fine with this because it checks all of our boxes and it's very clear. And as soon as we presented it, it was like, whoa, this is a little bit much. So I think that is the point at which we had to kind of go back to the drawing board. And again, kind of going back to that education component, we looped them in on graphic development. So we had 4 different graphic treatments that we were considering using for this product, and we had Editorial weigh in on what they thought was the most clear, why they liked it, why they didn't like certain options, and I think looping them in and kind of making sure that we were in lockstep with them for every decision made them feel heard and seen, and also made our product way stronger by the end of it.
What would happen if one of the reporters was like, I have an opinion about this. I don't think you should do that. I think you should do this.
Yeah, we welcome all comers. I mean, and our news team is not shy in sharing their opinion with us. And I think that, again, a lot of those conversations have happened in the context of a podcast. That's where it seems to be we've developed some safe space to talk about these kinds of things.
I'm the Director of Marketing Engagement for Vermont Public Radio, and this is our BizLab project. So even though we're a really small state, we've had a lot of challenges around living up to this vision of exploring the whole Vermont story together. I can read that, not up there. For example, Windham County, which is in the red on the bottom there in southern Vermont, it's one of our few regions that actually has a dedicated regional reporter, and Howard Weiss-Tisman is here today. Howard, wave to Howard. He's amazing and a really wonderful partner. He files on average 6 to 8 stories a month about southern Vermont. We host a satellite studio right in downtown Brattleboro in the Latches Hotel and Theater, and we put up a full power transmitter to really improve reception in Brattleboro in 2012. And yet, with all of that, there's this general perception that VPR is way too focused on the northern part of the state, Burlington and Montpelier specifically. And so there's this disconnect between what we thought we were providing to this area and what the actual perception is. One of the quotes from a focus group we had last year was, "There is a great big chunk of Vermont and real Vermonters south of Route 4. For real, it is not an abyss. We exist." So the problem that we brought to BizLab was, how can we connect with the existing resources that we do have? We have plentiful resources going into southern Vermont. How can we connect more deeply with our audiences in southern Vermont, specifically Windham County? And will that, if we felt more local, would that help increase engagement and then therefore revenue hopefully to follow? So we had a fair amount of research to begin with. In 2018, we had a professional outside research firm do a public service assessment, and they measured engagement and impact and the value of VPR to audiences around the state. So we had that going in, so a pretty good, and one of our focus groups actually took place in Windham County. So we had a pretty good read on audience perception there. We also, last summer and fall, did the Tell Me More tour, which was a 14-county listening tour to every county in the state. We had engagement events just to invite people to come and meet with VPR, let us know what was on their mind. It was a great excuse to get Scott Finn, who's here today, our new CEO, onboarded across the entire state. And we learned a lot. Again, we heard a lot of that. We want more local coverage. We want to feel like you're more in our community. So BizLab helped us refine a lot of that research. We had interviews with residents. We were able to map the themes. I think Sarah showed earlier, we were able to map some of the themes that came out of those interviews. And we reviewed analytics data with the help of Ted on vpr.org and learned more about the habits of Windham County users. And that's where we also learned that they tend to use Facebook a lot more than the rest of our listening audience to get their news. So, knowing all that, we knew that listeners wanted more coverage of their local community, but it's not practical as a public radio station, a statewide station, to put a reporter in every town or every county. That just isn't financially feasible for us. So our experiments focused on keeping the editorial and keeping the service as it is and finding ways to make sure that content is getting into the hands of people who live there and getting engaged with the people who live there to basically have VPR feel more local. So our criteria was that, again, we had to use resources that we already had available, so we could not hire a new reporter, unfortunately. Love Howard. We could use 5 more of him. And we couldn't change the editorial content because obviously the firewall is something we want to keep intact. So we focused around several different content experiments. We decided to try to get that Southern Vermont stories that were happening. We were trying to get them into the hands of people who live there to show, hey, there actually is Southern Vermont coverage being published from VPR. You're just missing it. So we boosted Facebook posts about Southern Vermont stories to our entire region, and then we measured the engagement of people who are from Windham County versus the rest of the state. And we also launched an automated Southern Vermont e-newsletter where every time a Southern Vermont story is published, it pings a list of our Southern Vermont email list, gets an automated newsletter with a, hey, there's a new story published, go check it out kind of a thing. On the engagement side, we were, again, looking to meet people where they are and really just sort of get to know them on a personal level. We had Howard stick his neck out a few times and really try to ask people to bring in story ideas. So we created a news tip sheet and had people, is it on here? Yes, right there. We had people, we asked, solicited story ideas from the community, and of course we got, a number of, hey, cover my random event and things like that. But we also got a lot of meaty story ideas out of that. And again, I think people just enjoyed just being asked. We have a perpetual survey in every e-newsletter that goes out to just keep an eye on the quality rating and give us their feedback and comments. And as Joan mentioned, we had a News and Brews event scheduled where people would get to interact with the reporters and talk about Southern Vermont's news. We had 76 people signed up. We had to postpone it. It is actually rescheduled for next month, which is great. So we'll report back on that at some point. And then finally, we also did some preliminary research about underwriting and whether businesses would be interested in targeting local underwriting that's geo-targeted toward Windham County because we are, again, a statewide service. We got some positive feedback from that, but we haven't gone further. At this point now, we need to build more infrastructure to explore that further. So conclusions. In terms of engagement and success, this works. We saw a year-over-year increase in Windham County web traffic. It's about 166% for September and October versus about 115% for the rest of the state. So we felt really good about that. The e-newsletter open rate is averaging at about 40% open rate. So those of you who work in email, that's a pretty big open rate. And the click-through rate is 5 to 10%. So we're going to keep doing that. And again, that was kind of a low lift. It was something just you set it up, and now it's running. And we also did some lead generation advertising. We grew the list by 35% in 3 weeks. And the survey rates the e-newsletter of 4.6 out of 5. So definitely a tactic that we were really excited about, and we're going to keep exploring. Some of the anecdotal comments we received as part of this work was, news is relevant and being more regional is more than I get from my local paper. Yay. And rarely am I able to get news that is truly local. That is refreshing. So, and of news tips, we got 4 stories. Howard has now filed 4 stories as a result of the tips we received from asking, and about 6 more in the pipeline. So that's also, again, 10 stories that would not have happened if we had not asked our audience who lives there about them. And in terms of, where am I? Sorry. We are now just starting the revenue capture. We only started this project in August. So it being December, it's a great month to give generously to your public radio station. We are working, we're keeping track of our drive results and keeping track of Windham County growth versus the rest of the state and some control counties. And we're also doing a targeted digital advertising campaign right now. So we don't have a lot of results to share. I will say that just this morning, I learned that our Giving Tuesday pledge drive was the first day of our drive as well. Our Giving Tuesday results showed that Windham County actually grew more in terms of average gift and total revenue compared to the other 2 control counties that we've been looking at. So that, again, it's one day of revenue to look at, but we're positive that that will continue. Everyone knows that membership is a pretty long game, so we may not know for another year or more what that does. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to click on it, sorry. I know you're all really thirsty. Our very basic conclusions are that radio is ephemeral, and you don't know whether you have, if you publish something on the radio, it goes away. People may not have heard it, and they assume that it's not there. So marketing works is the other side of that coin. It's worth it to spend some time marketing your content to the people who live there. And it's built a lot of pathways between marketing and development, which we will use, marketing and development and our news team, which we will be using as we start to build out our regional reporting structure. We'll definitely plan to replicate some of these tactics and hope that the revenue will follow. So thanks.
Hello, I'm Giselle Reid with Friends of WLRN. We are the fundraising arm for WLRN Miami, and we are a dual licensee station that serves all of South Florida. So our problem statement was we really wanted to create a new content delivery system that would attract and engage new audiences. As everyone, we're always trying to figure out, who that new audience is and how are we going to bring them in. And we really wanted to focus around a certain issue. And for us, we knew what the issue was going into the BizLab project. We knew that we wanted to focus on climate change and the environment, mainly because our particular region is affected by it in every facet of our lives on a daily basis. I'm sure everyone is across the world, but in South Florida, it's rising sea levels and climate change is a threat we face every single day. And so we wanted to figure out what product would that be and how would we generate some revenue around it. So we started with our research and discovery phase. The BizLab team helped us create some wonderful intercept interviews. They also helped us create some wonderful QR codes to go along with a lot of the surveys that we did. And we conducted these at environmental events around the South Florida region. Each of the events were strategically selected so that it represented a different type of audience. So we would go to some grassroots type of events, we went to some town halls, we went to business-oriented events, all having to do with environment, but targeting different groups. And the intercept interviews really helped us to uncover a lot of details about our audience, what they wanted to hear more of, how they wanted to consume that information, how they wanted it delivered, and that kind of helped shape the next step in our experiment, which was what product we were going to develop. And that product was an environmental newsletter. So we tested on a beta group, which was actually about 100, I want to say it was between 120 to 150 folks, I can't remember the exact number. And these folks were folks that we met at the interviews and at various events throughout the region that we had signed up for our environmental newsletter. So they all said they wanted to receive the newsletter, even though we weren't sure what was going to be in it yet. We just knew the topic, and basically they agreed to serve as our test group. We sent out various different emails testing subject lines, the tone of the newsletter, a more formal tone versus a very personal, informal tone, designs, buttons, label, everything you can think of, we tested across the board. We had many newsletters go out, and we did it through our old system, which was, we were using Constant Contact at the time to test this group. And then we moved into the second part of our experimentation phase, which was a partnership with News Revenue Hub. And the partnership with News Revenue Hub saw us have to integrate a multi-technology platform. So we had to go from using Constant Contact to using MailChimp as our email service system. And we used Stripe to process any payments, and then all of the data would go into Salesforce. All of these technology platforms are different than what we currently used in our membership department. So it was a big learning curve for us. We had to learn to use the technology and integrate it. It was very, very successful, I will say, as far as audience engagement went. Not only did we acquire subscribers through events where we would actually go and have people sign up for our newsletters, but we also took our membership database, which includes members and non-members, and we had News Revenue Hub work with us on delivering newsletter and testing engagement levels. And we tested engagement through open rates and click-through rates. And from an original 60-something thousand list, we were able to narrow down the engaged audience members to about 17,000. And those 17,000 are now our newsletter group that we started the second test of phasing, which was working with News Revenue Hub and our news content team on the newly curated newsletter, which looks a little something like this. So we actually have about an open rate of 30%. a click-through rate of about 2.5 to 3%, depending on the issues. Our audience is highly engaged. We actually receive feedback almost every single newsletter that we put out. 99.9% of it has been positive. I think we received one email back saying they don't believe in climate change, but other than that, everything has been quite positive. And we just 2 weeks ago started the revenue generation portion. So what News Revenue Hub is helping us do is create a series of messaging that goes into each newsletter that we send out. And that messaging is concise, crafted with their help on helping us to get the subscribers, our engaged audience, to actually make a donation. We are contemplating moving into a more membership type model, but as with any experiment, there are challenges, and we do have to work with our current membership team on how we're going to do that. We also see a lot of potential in the revenue generation component as in sponsorship of the newsletter, whether that be an independent sponsorship of just the newsletter or a more comprehensive underwriting package around the theme of environment as a whole, which is what our underwriting team is tending to lean towards. So we see a lot of the revenue generation coming from donations, membership, and potential underwriting sponsorship of the newsletter.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Toby Tabaczynski. I head up the business development and marketing for WDET, which is this phenomenal boutique public radio station in the heart of Detroit on Wayne State University's campus. And so proud to be here and do that. Our experiment, our problem, if you will, is an opportunity. As the head of underwriting, we have many small local businesses, mom and poppers, entrepreneurs, who are thriving and growing in Detroit and want to be part of the community. But they don't have a lot of money. They really can't afford traditional marketing and media. And so yet we said to ourselves, there's still an opportunity there. How can we go after that revenue and yet not spend the time and effort from an underwriter to go after that person who only has maybe a few $100s at a time to spend? So that was the hypothesis, which is there a way to go after that money and do it in an effective, scalable way? So what did we find out? First, we did our in-person interviews. We literally walked outside, and within 3-4 blocks, we had dozens of businesses. We talked to about 5 or 6, and we were armed with our script and cards from Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. And ready to do these interviews. And basically, we were asking for the owner or the manager, and typically it was one and the same, and said, hey, would you mind talking with us for a few minutes about your marketing? All of them said yes. And we had really great conversations with them. And some things started to bubble up, some consistencies, and also proved our point, which is they have limited marketing and budget. They don't use traditional media. All of them said we would not do advertising on TV, print, or normal radio. They all love us because we are part of the community, and they respect WDET and what we stand for. And they align with our mission and culture. And here is the one aha moment. For all these folks who have no money, well, they do. They spend it on social media. They all have their sister-in-law in the back room, their brother Bob. Somebody handles social media for them, and they do posts, typically on Instagram and Facebook. And they will spend a few $100s at a time to boost those posts to their audience to drive traffic. So that was the moment that says, okay, you really do have money, but they're not savvy, they're not sophisticated, they live within their own world and only can do what they can do. And so we realized, and they realized as we're talking, that we're a good batch, and they'd like to align with us if there was a way to do that. So here's our discovery research. When we found out that social media was the way to go, we solicited a few local businesses to say, hey, would you like to be our guinea pigs in this test that we're going to do? And so we created some social media profiles, if you will, and some creative models to try to prove out, to see what could we do that would work to extend what a business is already doing, which is telling their story on social media, and yet extend that to our audience and our halo effect of what WDET, the brand, can bring to it. Because that's where the real value is. They want it to be aligned with our brand and what we could do for them. So as you can see, we've created a couple of models within that to distinguish that social media from our editorial. And you'll learn more in a session after this on that conversation and collaboration between our editorial team, who, when we first shared this with them and said, hey, we have a great idea, we're going to make more money, and we're going to do it on social media, there was a no, timeout, folks. But it was a really good timeout. Again, we'll share more about that later. But as you could see, these are designed. So we went through some processes in testing photography, which is key, copy and telling their story, the length of the copy, who the audience was. We did different filtering for different audiences within our tests. And what did we find out? Well, we found out that Facebook and Instagram is a unique partner. They changed the game. You can't always predict, hey, if I'm going to spend $50 and I'm going to target this audience, what am I going to get? There is no absolute answer. So it's a moving formula. But again, good to know. And I would also say part of our preface with this is we're not going to overpromise expectations when we do this for clients. Secondly, we really had a good interaction with our news editorial team to sell the concept internally. They forced us to go back and rethink things for the better, because if we just did it the way we wanted to, it would have worked, but it wouldn't have been right. And then we also looked at different test models, and again, we're consolidating 50 slides into 4, so there's a lot more detail here. But we found out that Facebook's lookalike filter ended up being the most effective for the dollars that we spent. So our recommendation is to continue to develop this collateral. As Joan mentioned, this isn't a quick, here's the idea, here's revenue. It's a process. And thank you to the BizLab folks for allowing us to be part of this, because we wouldn't have been here at this point without your support and effort. So that was really great. So this will be a product for us in some shape or form to provide social media brand halo effect for our clients. And I would say also, if you're all familiar with eMarketer just came out with a report that really validated this. The report was from January 2019 on social media business influencers. And by far, businesses use, get this, Instagram posts and Instagram stories to tell their story, more than double of any other Facebook. So it told us that we were on the right path.